It's my pleasure to introduce our host of a very special plenary session that we'll be moving into, Blanca Melendrez. And she is the executive director for the Center of Community Health at UCSD, UC San Diego. So in this role, Blanca leads collective community-wide efforts to enact policy, system, and environmental changes aimed at impacting social determinants of health through a racial equity lens. Blanca really develops and maintains and fosters impactful collaborations with a number of public agencies, including the State Department of Public Health, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the CDC, or San Diego Health and Human Service agencies, for our Early Intervention First 5 Commission, and many more. And so we're really grateful to Blanca for hosting our special plenary, and I will turn it over to Blanca.
Thank you so much, Lauren, and good morning, everyone. It is my pleasure to be the host for this special plenary session titled Applying Science Implementation Research. And in this session, we're going to hear how teen science can not only inform, but enhance a community academic research and practice. We're going to hear from our panelists, what are the strategies to build effective partnerships, the power dynamics in this type of work, and what are some of the elements for sustainability in community coalition and cross-sector teams. As mentioned before, our moderators for this panel is Dr. Sean Burke and Dr. Chris Wise. You can go to the next slide, please. Translational research is impactful when teen science includes the community. In this case, community members and stakeholders as integral members of the research team. And we are fortunate today, as you realized, about our community engagement expertise on this panel. I am excited this morning that we are joined by 5 leaders and community gatekeepers who are going to share with us today their unique work and expertise in community engagement and research. So first, I would like to introduce you to Margarita Holguin and Diana Barrentos. Margarita Holguin is the Director of Partnership Initiatives at We Support You. She has many years of experience working with residents and building capacity. Most recently, she is leading the Resident Leadership Academies. She was also named the Latina of the Year in 2017 by the Adelante Mujer Conference. She founded the San Diego Promotoras Academy in 2009. She is currently the chair of the San Diego Promotoras Coalition. And I had the pleasure of working with her.
I think Blanca may have cut out here for a moment. All right, I'll continue to introduce. I just want to make sure it's not just on my end, but I have the pleasure of continuing these wonderful introductions here. We also on the panel is Dr. Jessie Nadora, an associate professor at Herbert Wertheim School of Public Health and Human Longevity Science and Director of Community Engagement at ACTRI. In addition, he is a leader in Moore's Cancer Center Community Outreach and Engagement. Jessie has 13 years experience as a public health program administrator at the state level, California and Arizona. He's an active volunteer with the American Cancer Society and various community nonprofits. He's done wonderful, really community engaged, community-based research, academic partnerships for many, many years. And then we have Reem and Rama. Reem Zubaidi is the manager of the UC San Diego Center for Community Health Refugee Health Unit. She's also the co-facilitator for the San Diego Refugee Communities Coalition, a recently formed collaborative of ethnic community-based organizations whose mission is to work together on coordinated actions to ensure that individuals and families from refugee communities throughout San Diego County are healthy, safe, and thriving. Reem has a master's in public policy from UCSD here. And her partner in this work, Rama Awad, is a community organizer and advocate with the Majal Center, a local resource and community space for San Diego's Arab residents, refugees, and immigrants. And the center is based in El Cajon, San Diego, and works on youth leadership, empowerment, community health and well-being, and newcomer support. The Majal Center is one of 11 organizational members at the San Diego Refugee Communities Coalition. All right, and Blanca, I see that you're back, and I want to make sure that we've introduced everybody fully. So I'm going to back up here and let you introduce the last person that we may have not done full justice to, Diana Barrientos. You want to introduce Diana?
Thank you very much, Claire, and I apologize. I'm having internet connectivity issues. Diana Barrientos is a community wrestling leader for the city of Chula Vista, a health enthusiast and a mother of two. She participates in community improvement programs, and she has a background in health administration and nursing. Most recently, she is working with Margarita Holguin, implementing a Wrestling Leadership Academy in the city of Chula Vista to create a healthy Chula Vista. So thank you very much, Claire, for introducing our speakers. And I believe that if everybody has been introduced, we're going to now pass it on to our panelists who are going to be sharing about their team science work. So our first speaker is Margarita Holguin.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting us to share with you a little bit about who we are and the science of our team. And our team is a community team that really looks at more working with the public sector efforts. We are a partnership between the American Public Health Association and
Margarita, you just muted yourself.
Oh, next slide, please. So here we have our promotores and our community residents. This is a photo that we took the day of our graduation. This was our Resident Leadership Academy graduation, which is a 10-week academy. And we had the pleasure of having the mayor of Chula Vista come join us and congratulate all the members and sign certificates for everyone. Next slide. So our team, as I mentioned, hopefully you heard, it is a community-based team. We are a partnership between the American Public Health Association and UCSD Center for Community Health, and we support you. We have a team of 13, there is 4 promotoras and 9 community resident leaders. And our scope is to come up with a project that will work on food security and obesity prevention that involves policy, systems, and environmental change, and it is specific to Chula Vista. So in sharing with you about our team truly reflects the community that we will be working in Chula Vista. It is a team of mostly Latina women. We have, of the 13 residents, 12 are Latinas, 1 is an African-American woman, and they come from different walks of life, from different education levels. Some are US born, some are immigrants, some are English speakers, some are bilingual, some are monolingual Spanish. This team truly owns the process, and that's what's made it very successful. We didn't hire them to come and say, we hired you to come and do X. We hired them to say, come and help us decide what we're going to do. So they own the process from the beginning. They have input at all levels. We hire the promotoras, and they helped us hire the community residents. They're involved in all the decisions, from coming up with what questions we ask as part of our assessment. We provided capacity building for all of them. And an important part of this is, as they enter this process, they had to make a commitment to stay with it for up to the 2 years that the contract was. And there is compensation for each. The promotoras are all employees, so they get an hourly wage, and the community residents have all been offered a stipend. So that's more of the structure of the team. And I'd like to then go on to the next slide and ask Diana to share a little bit about her perspective. And Diana is one of our resident leaders. Diana, are you able to speak?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm there. Hi, my name is Diana. I'm Diana Barrientos, and I'm a community resident leader for the city of Chula Vista. And I'll tell you more about our team and how it's set up. And as a community resident, being part of my team has made me feel really empowered. Our setup is customized to an involved learning style, and in our conversations, I feel like my opinion really matters, and it could influence and trigger change. My team is made up of ladies with different skills and perspectives, and this allows for interesting and diverse dialogues. Simultaneous interpretation is always available for us, so it's easy for us to communicate. Even if we don't speak the same language, we're all on the same page. And I do feel that the decisions we make are born collectively. Like, for example, in our current project, our team collected data in picture format to define challenges within our community. We did this individually on our own time, but not surprisingly, many other concerns were the same. Later, with the information we gathered, our group used this material to come up with survey questions that will provide us with a better understanding of what our community really needs. In my team, everyone willingly participates in every discussion, and we make these decisions together. We vote on what doesn't, and we vote on what works and what doesn't. We are provided with a lot of tools that help us. So Margarita provides us with great stability in this team.
Thank you, Diana.
Thank you very much, Margarita and Diana. Our next presenter, I know we already introduced Reem and Rama. I just want to say that San Diego is home to the largest refugee resettlement in the state of California. And we are very pleased to have our refugee community represented today. Reem is also a member of Supervisor Fletcher's task force, and I don't know if that was mentioned during the introduction. So now, refugee community partners.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having us. So I'd like to introduce the coalition very quickly, a little background on the coalition. It's a collaborative of 11 ethnic community-based organizations who focus on refugee and new immigrant populations in San Diego. It's a very diverse group in terms of the people served, the services provided, and the size and capacity of each of the organizations. Each of these organizations have the same sort of goals of addressing the needs for improved outcomes towards equity and reduced disparities across the social determinants of health. Next slide, please. So the coalition was basically started in response to the need to take control of some of the research that was happening that included, people kind of coming into communities, conducting research, often without really explaining what it was for, and then community members not really seeing any benefit from the research that was being done. So it was really out of a need to increase agency for our refugee communities and to create a coordinated effort to better represent our communities and respond to their needs. And that includes being able to change the narrative around refugee communities and ensure that our organizations are in a way sort of gatekeepers to these communities, since they're the experts, they speak the languages, they're from the communities, and they're trusted within the communities that they're from. It's also a way to sort of coordinate our work to create more opportunities for funding and partnerships for each of the organizations, rather than sort of competing with each other for the same funding, for example, or not being able to go after something because you don't have the capacity or the right service areas or things like that, which really led to a lot of community members missing out on important services and advocacy efforts. So one of our big successes since we started is working with the county on COVID-19 community outreach, which has allowed us to hire community health workers from all of these different organizations that are part of the coalition, and really create a model of outreach and that really focuses on getting feedback and input from the community members and elevating that to really get the necessary resources and information to our community members. Next slide. And I'll let Rama introduce the Majd Center.
Great, thank you, Reem, and thank you everyone for having me. So my name is Rama Awad, and I'm the community organizer at the Majd Center. We're also known as the Arab Community Center of San Diego. The Majd Center was founded in 2018, so it's a relatively newer community organization. And we are a resource and community center based in El Cajon, which is in East County. And that's where there's a large concentration of Syrian, Iraqi, and other Arab refugee and immigrant communities. And so that's our main base, the Arabic-speaking refugee and immigrant communities. And our main areas of work are around youth education and empowerment, community health and well-being, newcomer support, and then advocacy and policy work. And then, as was mentioned earlier, the Majd Center is one of 11 ethnic community-based organizations that constitute the San Diego Refugee Communities Coalition. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Reem and Rama. And next, but not least, is Jesse Nodora.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I think it's still morning for folks across the country. So what you're getting here, I think, is a little bit of an overview of the background that represents years, in some cases, decades of experience working in a variety of different communities, different areas, the organizational structure, and the leadership. I think ultimately the work that we do is trying to move us in the partnership realm of community academic partnerships, trying to move us beyond the typical last minute letter of recommendation, the typical community advisory board, the unbalanced contracts that exists. And the dialogue that we're going to have, I think, is going to focus around that. What you see here in terms of my own background, I think my experience has been shaped by having a purposeful career path, I guess, that was really going towards a hybrid of practice and discovery. And I actually started out in practice with doing tobacco control work at the state level, policy work. And that certainly has informed the kinds of experiences that I'm trying to develop and champion as I've transitioned over to academic work. But I'll be the first to get in line and say that our academic infrastructures do not lend themselves easily to partner with communities, especially if you're doing grants, research. There are a few funding entities out there that try to push the envelope a little bit. But even there, we're still doing research at the end of the day. And a lot of the community organizations, including folks that are on this panel, are not really about research. They're about service, and they're more interested in evaluation than they are in research. So finding that common ground, a lot of the elements that Sean and Chris covered yesterday, I think we're going to talk about some of the realities and trying to do some of this in partnership. And then to add on to that, when you have communities, underserved communities, culturally distinct communities, and so on, I think you basically see some of the complexities. And if COVID has taught us nothing in the last year and a half, it's basically how many challenges we have in front of us, how many great opportunities, but who's putting that food on the table, and what does it take? And how is the health of those individuals being taken for granted, and how do our systems not serve them? And how do we as researchers not do a good job in trying to advance those services and trying to put out information that doesn't take almost 2 decades to get out? I think that's what this conversation is about. And ultimately, implementation science is also supposed to be about that. But if you go to the larger implementation science meetings, it's ironic that almost 10 years into implementation science, we're starting to have this conversation of, we're really not seeing a lot of diversity in our work. We're not seeing a lot of links with community or the kinds of links that we should have. So I think those are really the challenges that we face. The Clinical Translational Science Awards, the CTSA Awards, our specific flavor of that is that ACTRI, the Altman Clinical and Translational Research Institute. You know, these infrastructures at academic institutions as well are supposed to champion and bridge that divide, you know, from bench science, as I mentioned yesterday on the left-hand side, all the way to community. But those of us, and I'm fairly new to this because I've only been the director for community engagement at ACTRI since the fall. I can tell you that the emphasis is not on the community side within these organizations. The emphasis is on the bench and the clinical. So we have some work to do. All of us have some work to do to really try to push the envelope. I think some of the examples that Chris gave yesterday of what Georgia has been doing, and if you go to the Georgia CTSA page, you're going to see some really good stuff happening there. I think that's the exception and not the norm. So I think we're going to get right into the dialogue, and this is supposed to be a dialogue. So the energy yesterday was wonderful. I think this group is not shy at all. And don't be afraid to ask the tough questions, because you have some individuals here that are living in that reality and will speak truth. So I'll leave it at that. Good setup, huh, Sean and Chris?
Good setup. Thank you, Jesse. And thanks for all the amazing introductions. I think the way that we've got about 4 to 5 questions that we're going to pose to the panel. We talked about being that we're all virtual, maybe the easiest way, you know, we'll start off with one person, but then if you have something that you feel you want to add as the next round, my Zoom screen just changed as everybody came on board. If you have something, then use that raise hand feature at the bottom of the screen there, and that'll let Chris and I know an easy visual way, you know, to reach out to you. This is for the panelists, obviously. For the attendees, if you have questions, please, we do want this to be interactive also. So use that Q&A feature, and we will try to pepper those in to make sure, because you've got an amazing resource here. So we don't just want our panelists to be talking to one another. We also want some questions from the audience. And with that being said, let me switch over to our first question. So yesterday, Chris talked a lot, and a theme that's come across a lot is the importance of communication, right? So one of our questions that we wanted to pose was, based on your experience, how to best promote synergy and effective communication when you're working with stakeholders from many different fields, many different disciplines. And Marguerite, I don't know if you want to kind of take an initial stab at that from your perspective.
Certainly. I think that the best way to do that is really by being committed and demonstrating shared value. If we as the community side of the work, and I have worked both on public service and research specific projects, it is about what is the value to us, not just pick our brain, but what is the value that we're getting out of this. So demonstrating that common value, finding those common goals would be one way in which we can have that synergy. Having us be truly be at the table.
Does anybody else have anything that they'd like to add?
Sure. If I may, I think both of you, particularly Chris, I think touched on this yesterday. It's one thing to talk among, as scientists, right, as academics doing research, it's one thing to talk among ourselves, you know, folks working on omics versus folks working on epidemiology or prevention, even different disciplines. Having a common language, and I think more often than not, we are saying the same thing, but in different words. We even have very similar frameworks or theories or structures that we work on. They're just named differently. It kind of goes back to that old Beatles song, "There's nothing new under the sun." I think that's who it attributed to. But common language, I think, is really the critical part, and that takes a little bit of time. So the language, the common language between those of us who are doing discovery analysis and all of that on a daily basis, our brains are working a little bit different than folks in the community who are actually doing intervention and program and services and evaluation. So trying to find that common language between those two groups, I think, is an important thing. It's super important to consider complementary skills and benefits that that different individuals bring in, particularly from experience. And that also takes a little bit of time to recognize that, and then to synthesize it to how we view things. The last thing I'll say in terms of communication is, and it was touched on a lot yesterday, which is how do you prepare for misunderstandings? And the whole team building and trust process goes a long way if in addressing misunderstandings and really getting at them before they grow. And before, I think Chris alluded to this issue of resentment that will build among teams, and it creates real rifts, and it makes it even harder and harder to communicate as you go on.
I also want to add that when it comes to communication and working with the community, it's very important that we approach our community with humility. They are the experts. They know what the issues are and they know what the solutions are. So approaching our community and communicating in this way is key. Most recently with this anti-racism movement across the country, we know that it's also important when we communicate with community to acknowledge structural racism. So those are some of the things that we're doing here locally with Margarita and appropriate when working with these communities and making sure that communication.
Blanca, we're losing you.
Does, as we wait to see if Blanca unfreezes or not, does anybody have anything that they want to add? Does, you know, based on what some of the other members have said, anything that kind of pops up? If not, we will move on to the next question. But I think that's a great, oh, I see Blanca's back.
I'm back, and I apologize. I think I was just closing by acknowledging the need to be culturally sensitive and appropriate in meeting people where they are and meeting their needs. So when it comes to communication, being very sensitive about their language, but also about their culture, and treating them with respect and humility. I think that Margarita, I wanted to invite Margarita and Reem to see if they have any examples of strategies for communicating with communities and research when looking at teams.
Well, as Jesse mentioned, is finding that common language, but it's also that common goal. If you're any partner that approaches us in community would be about being able to openly communicate so we're both on the same page, yes, but also finding the benefit both to our community, to the research, to the reason why we're doing this. So in all the work that we do is always about how does this benefit my community? So if you come to us with a project that benefits my community, we're going to be interested. But we want to be at the table and be able to have that voice and say, no, that doesn't work. That just doesn't work for our community. And there's been plenty of times when it's just an intervention that wouldn't work for this population. So giving us that opportunity to share with you what we know based on our experience in community.
Yeah, and I would just also add that this is kind of the reason why we work very closely with the communities that actually with representatives that actually work with or are from those communities, because it can't be understated or overstated how important it is to be able to communicate in somebody's primary language, especially when you're talking about something that is very sensitive or could, cause, stress or anxiety. And we see that a lot with our work doing COVID outreach and really just understanding how to approach a topic when people are not, when people are hesitant about it, and just making sure that the community member feels heard and seen and understood. That's always the top priority over anything else that you're kind of trying to achieve.
I put in the chat a great resource, which if you do community work, you're probably familiar with it, which is the principles of community engagement. There are principle 4 and 8, the collective self-determination portion, and being prepared to release control, principle 8, really address some of the issues that both Reem and Margarita have been raising. And one of the biggest challenges, I think Reem raised this, in terms of having individuals or investigators on the academic side that are at least have experience with the community or from the community, is a real challenge, particularly if you're talking about, principal investigators or even co-investigators on grants, because there aren't a lot of folks that ascend, into the levels of leadership and so on. Even here, I would say, you look at a place like UCSD, you would think, well, let's see, there's so many, so many Hispanics, so many Latinos, Latinas, you would think that there'd be a bunch of Latino professors at UCSD. Not when you start whittling it down to given areas. And so those are some of the challenges. You don't have a lot of folks that are of the community or from the community, experience with the community. You have a lot of people who are interested in working with the community, but there isn't an infrastructure yet to train them on those partnerships. We're moving towards that in the ACTRI, but we're not quite there yet.
Lastly, I just remember from yesterday the importance of communication, not just inside the research team, but outside with the external community. And if community is engaged, the importance of transparent conversations and guidelines. I was thinking about the contract that was shared. How would that work with the community? And having worked with the Refugee Communities Coalition in San Diego, where they created guidelines on how researchers should be communicating with them and the kind of information that they needed in order to have trust in the research and their work and develop a strong partnership. So again, going back to the communication, there's so many different layers to it, but it's key in building trust in the community. And if Reem can share a little bit about how that, maybe in the following questions, she can share how the coalition set up their structure and their guidelines on communication and partnership agreements with researchers.
So there's a very clear point of having representation and ensuring that the community has voice. But there are some of these challenges that you potentially need to overcome, even when you are there when you have these groups of individuals together. So the second question tries to get a little bit at that, is like, what are the challenges you experienced in your community-related community work related to decision-making when community members who have different status or representation or at the table. How do you ensure that there is, I think, that sort of voice, right? Just having someone at the table may not necessarily be enough, at least that's the way I'm interpreting that question. And I think, Margarita, you have noted that you want to comment on that.
I mentioned that in my response as well. It's being at the table means that you're given a place, that you're asked. So specifically asking, if you're involving community residents, for example, you need a community leader to be there, to be their advocate, to be the person that knows how to engage and communicate and ask for their voice. So it's one thing to be around, to be at the table, but not be able to participate as much. So sometimes making sure that those of us in community understand what is being said And sometimes it's way above our head, and it's very academic or very clinical. So really finding that common language, as Jesse mentioned, and looking at what does that mean to us in community? And how do we truly understand the issue? And then giving that person the opportunity to comment, to specifically ask, well, what do you think? What are your thoughts? How does this work when you're out in community? Does that answer your question? A little bit?
Yeah, I think so. Jesse, you also indicated it seems a little bit of different answers here as well with the 9 principles of CE. Is that what you shared earlier?
Yeah, no, certainly. The challenges in terms of decision making, if we talk strictly about partnerships for grants, for discovery, for research, it's the challenge often is that my experience has been that you really don't have, you have two groups going at the research in slightly different ways. The academics dealing with the research question, the study aims, and so on and so forth, and your community partner contributing, usually in the most traditional sense, looking at the work that you're doing, more reviewing. And it's fairly rare that you have a community partner that works on the research question, that works on the aims, and is really shaping that along with you. That I haven't seen as much, at least not in my own work. I don't know if Dr. Ahrens or others, even you guys, Chris and Sean, with what you're doing, because you're working with like community constituents to some degree, especially you, Sean, that are scientists, right? When you go work with NASA, they're a community entity in one way, but on the other hand, they're scientists, they're engineers, and so on. So they kind of speak language similar to us. It's very different than the kind of organizations that are represented here on the panel. That, as I said, their day job is not science necessarily. So, so bridging that divide and having true decision making and true equal contribution is about something that takes that really happens way before you put together a grant, in my mind. It's about the scientists going back through to anthropology, really being embedded and being part of the community, and spending time there and really developing and understanding the need. If you go back to the principles, you know, that first principle is really about, or the second principle is know the community. And knowing the community in reality means being embedded within the community, and then working on, you know, identifying those needs and so on, and working together on research questions, the specific aims. Because to me, that's for our world in terms of research, everything is being driven largely by those specific aims. Everything is driven by the specific aims, including the budget. So to me, it kind of just flows off of that. And being part of the decision making is being part of that most critical part, and then going from there. I think Claire pointed us to some of the questions that we're getting in the Q&A. I don't know if we want to pivot to answer some of those as we go, or how do you want to deal with this, Blanca?
Yeah, I think we were gonna pivot to answer some of those too. Some of them I think you spoke to a little bit already. So I see one in here from Francis, which I think we've kind of touched on a little bit, that asks, how can we begin to engage our community to create the balance and supports and understanding the values between and among each other when writing grants and conducting research? And I think, Jesse, in some ways, some of the stuff that you were just saying begins to, you know, to get at that. Is there anything else anybody would like to add along those lines?
I would like to add, this is Margarita, that as when we're saying we want community at the table, then reflect that in your budgets and in your grants as you request that, and give the community their space and the funding that's required, have them as a line item. So if we want to be you want that partnership, there has to be that commitment and demonstrated budget.
Thank you, Margarita. And what I've heard in our experience with community work and research is the need to address equity and to address root causes. So we need to make sure that all voices are heard equally, and one group is not disadvantaged or marginalized. In this case, when we're writing grants, that we know and we plan in advance with the community that they are included in the budget, not just as a stipend, but treated as equal partners. So when we're in the community and we invite them to attend our meetings, we are all getting compensated for attending meetings and participating in projects, and our community historically has not been participating in this. So when it comes to decision making, we need to be addressing equity to make sure that the community is treated as equal partner and participates from the very beginning of the planning all the way to the implementation, and throughout the process having an equal say and sharing power as we move forward with this work. I wanted to also invite, I don't know, Diana or also Rama and Reem to see if they can share about these challenges in terms of decision making and what your coalitions have done to address this.
Yeah, I think everything that Blanca and Margarita have just said, I think that's really part of the goal of actually starting the coalition, was to kind of achieve, to work towards that equity where we are actually part of the process from the very beginning, rather than having, really small organizations. Some of them are very new organizations. It's a little bit more difficult for them to be in a position where they can, where they're at the table and they're able to give their input and all of that. So part of the coalition's idea is to actually have a group of organizations that support each other, and that, when somebody or when we approach a grant or something like that, we are able to say, like, this is what we bring to the table. And for that reason, we really have a lot of flexibility in being able to adapt projects or write grants ourselves, or things like that really allow us to have more agency in the process.
Yeah, if I could add to that, this is Rama. One thing that I think the San Diego Refugee Communities Coalition does really well is emphasize and cultivate a culture of collaboration and not competition. So all of the member organizations will apply to grants together, and usually there's a lead that's the main contractor, being able to carry that sort of financial responsibility or has the experience, and the remaining organizations are subcontractors there. So just built into the very infrastructure of the coalition, we have a way for the budget to be dispersed in a more equitable way. One thing that I wanted to add to what was spoken about earlier is really bringing community along from the beginning. So even in developing the goals and objectives and even the methodologies of research, I think it's really important to have that be grounded in actual conversations with community, so that the content of the research is beneficial to and needed by the community that you're seeking to research or provide data for. And I think equal to the content of the research is how the research is conducted. And I think it's really important that research is done in a way that's sustainable and in a way that's not extractive of community resources. Because we're already talking about communities that are under-resourced systematically, economically, politically. And when institutions and research teams from universities come in, I think it's really important to recognize that under-resourcing and to do its best to better compensate. So including us in the line budgets of your grants is really critical, because oftentimes we don't have dedicated staff to participating in research. And so it's an opportunity for researchers to actually leverage university funding, public funding, whether that be state or even national funding, to help leverage those resources to these community institutions. And so those are just some ideas for ways I think the university can play a role. And I'll just conclude by saying that I think it's, and emphasizing what's already been said, I think community leaders need to be brought in from the beginning through the end, and having that really clear communication about what is expected. I think that really helps in any partnership or collaboration.
Yeah, if I could add to that, I think there are a couple of questions. I think part of the answer, B. Schindler said, we talk a lot about complexities of value exchange, and while sometimes this is funding, there's a strong balance. They're being able to be transparent and autonomous while also being paid through the academy. How do you all balance value exchange with commitment to not creating conflict or interest? Alejandra Aguirre goes on to say, how have the CBOs, community-based organizations on the panel, leveraged their partnerships with UCSD and other academic institutions to advance their work in D&I? And Francis says, can you say more about how to address the power differentials to achieve equity from the beginning? How do you do this and do it well? The operative word being at the academic side, but we're working with community partners. The word is transparency. And if you talk about power dynamics, particularly as it relates to budget, if you're going to get in bed with academic institutions to do research, one of the first things that you're going to want to consider or explore is how much is it going to cost you to do certain partnership. For example, if you're going to stand up a program, or you're going to do a questionnaire with so many people and so on. Rama alluded to this. We don't have all these staff that we can just bring in to go do these questionnaires for you. But if you're going to give us the budget to hire some time or whatever, we can do that. We can, move people around. So if you know what is being asked of you, you can basically think that through either by yourself as an organization or in partnership with your academic partner. And once you know what your cost is, you basically have a starting point from which to begin. But as important as that is to figure out what this overall budget looks like. And one of the things you'll see is you'll see a grant that's $2 million over 5 years, right? And you as a community organization are getting $60,000 a year for 3 years of the 5 years, maybe. So you say, wait a minute, $2 million, I'm getting 60K, how does that work? Well, what you want to do is you want to sit down with your academic partner and look at that math, look at the indirects, look at all of those pieces and have them walk you through it. They'll be more than happy to walk you through it if they're a true partner, right? So you can't be shy about those things. And the community organizations that have gotten much more sophisticated have gotten to the point where they insist on memorandums of understanding, they insist on data sharing agreements, and so on and so forth. Even to the point where we as academics began to say, man, it's a pain in the ass to work with those people because there's so many hoops that you've got to jump through. But you know what? What do you think our contracts offices is, at the university, and the lawyers? That's exactly what they do. They protect the interests of the university and they protect the interest of us as researchers. So that's the reality of transparency and having these conversations, from the get-go about what this looks like, and starting from the organization level of what is it going to cost me to do that as a community organization or as a community entity. And just think of it as a business transaction, that part of it. And I think you'll be in a great position. And there's a saying, in Spanish, and I'm not sure, it's kind of like cuentas claras, amistad largas. So it's like clear transactions, long friendships, right? That the cards are on the table and you know what you're dealing with. I don't think it's any different than that. And the last thing I'll say in terms of some of these questions of how do you deal with these complexities and where do you go? If you look at a lot of the existing work from the academic side, like the principles of community engagement or community-based participatory research, there are entire books on that. Everything's in there. Everything is in there. The thing is, you have to kind of go looking for it and figure from the community side, figure out your touch points. And then academics, I think all these things that you heard about, humility, openness, flexibility, culturally, synced and all of that. Those are the things that we as academics, need to be a little more cognizant of. I try to answer or try to get at a lot of those questions. Hopefully we covered them.
Thank you, Jesse. And I think I just want to add to that question about decision-making, sharing power. If we are sharing power and decision-making with community, that means we understand the community needs. And many times, we are collecting data that it's not needed, that maybe never used and never shared back with the population intended to serve. So we tend to take a very top-down approach that claims to be best practice, but unrelated to specific communities that we are serving, to specific current societal conditions. So when we don't share power, we are neglecting place-based people power and assuming that our communities are deficient and starting a point of inquiry to develop interventions with that mindset. So letting funders shape research objectives, methods, and how results are shared, in my opinion, are a mistake. And that's why we need to engage the community in decision-making.
I'd also like to add something really quickly, and it goes on to what I think I've heard a number of people say today, and that's about the building of partnerships, and that as academics, we need to make that investment to build those partnerships before it's time for the proposal. And in some cases, the things that I've seen work really well, and it's probably easier for senior professors, but on the academic side, we invest time getting to know those communities and getting to know those problems, and sometimes even giving what we would consider free work. So working with them on different things to build those partnerships before you start going in and saying, hey, can you give me this stuff? But some of it's, what can I give you? What can I show you and help you out with, initially, and then going after those proposals after those relationships are built, so that people feel more free to begin to have some of those kind of honest conversations. Sorry, I didn't mean to totally stop the flow of conversation. So are there other things, one of the things that I've noticed, and this kind of goes to kind of the power dynamics, which I think keep coming up time and time again. And there's part of that that's, the seat at the table, but then there's part of that, once you get the seat at the table, are there strategies that you guys have found, especially being that a lot of the communities that you guys serve are different culturally based communities, right? And are there strategies that you have found to work well when we start working with community-based organizations where you have a mixture of cultures that are coming to the table and trying to work together as a team, where they may view, they have different ideas about when it's okay to speak up and what drives some of these power dynamics? Are there strategies that you guys have found well to help people other than just asking? Because I may ask and I still may not feel comfortable speaking up, right? Are there other things that you guys do to try and engage?
Margarita, do you want to share what's happening in the city of Chula Vista with Healthy Cities?
Sure.
And
One of the things that we've done, because we do have a little bit of a different power dynamics, we have people from different walks of life and different education levels. So we notice the differences in questions. But one of the things that we've done is we've brought in a lot of information and data and brought in experts to share the overall. And we continue to talk about this is the overall. How do we get to what we want to do next? And we do say, well, if you want that information, let's bring it in. Or if you want to explore that, there's many times when I will say, okay, how should we do that? What do you think would work to make sure that this point is taken? And so it's taken that time to just specifically do that. And I see that Diana would also like to comment on this.
yes, our team pretty much does very well in distributing the responsibility. I mean, before in the account, myself did not have. So I applied that to what I already knew. My connection's is unstable, so I don't know if you can hear me very well. So with those tools and what I already knew, what I would see in my community, I kind of put two and two together and made it to where I was given a voice, and a voice that was maybe a little bit more tailored to me just saying, oh, I didn't like this outside. Now I know how to get involved, who gets involved, and how I can help out with that situation. So it's very, very rewarding to have that like backbone of what I know and now what I've been taught, what I've learned in the academy. So distributing responsibility there is important to all of us. And it makes our group have like a good value. It gives us a good voice.
We've tried to get the residents to provide their input, their knowledge, but also look at the bigger picture, look at data, look at presentations. We brought in someone from the city, someone from the school district. If there's an issue, well, what's on in the school lunches? Let's bring in the nutrition supervisor from the school district. Talk to us about what's in the lunches. So that gives them the power to ask questions, to know that they're being heard, that they're at the table, and that their concerns are going to be addressed.
Thank you. That's great.
So we got, I guess, 3 minutes left. I'm trying to look at some of the, something that we could meaningfully discuss in the next 3 minutes that we haven't touched on already. But maybe we could talk about what strategies you have found to help the teams gel with one another. Reem, do you want to take the lead on this question?
Sure, yeah. I think really one of the most important things that's been mentioned is just communication, and also like during meetings, whether that's with coalition members or with community health workers, just really checking in, both in terms of the work that's being done, but also to set aside time to reflect on the work, and also to share kind of what's happening in our personal lives for those who want to share, especially during COVID. But I think having a space that allows for like a back and forth during the meetings that kind of allows for people to provide feedback, whether like, for example, when we're working on the county project with the community health workers, a lot of the times that's where we really get, we hear about issues in the communities that we were not aware of, that community members might come and talk about with one of the community health workers. And that becomes something that we focus on. For example, when we were talking about COVID vaccine hesitancy, that became something that we focused on really way before the vaccine even came out, and helped us to focus the narrative on addressing that before people were able to take appointments and things like that, so that we were prepared for that. And that really just came out through talking to community members and having our community health workers bring that feedback back to us. So just having that space, and also it's also a really great opportunity for us to identify that there are some community health workers who, for example, are more experienced in certain things and can help address issues that other people are having and really take a lead on that. So it really becomes like a natural distribution of like who is best able to address what, and who to go to for certain things when the topic comes up at a later date. It really feels a lot more natural than kind of like assigning roles, or it's a really great opportunity to get to know the team and everybody's strengths. And I think that's one of the ways that we the strategies that we use to really get the team going.
Thank you so much,
So
Reem.
I know we're at time, but I do want Rama to because a lot of the things I'm going to be talking about next, essentially we're covering right now. So I think it may be a little okay if we spill a little bit over. Rama, what are your thoughts on this?
Sure. I think Reem really covered most of the things that I've noticed about the San Diego Refugee Communities Coalition, but something I think to echo is, it's really building across communities or inter-community as well. A lot of the members of the San Diego Refugee Communities Coalition are working so deeply in their own respective communities. And it's really become a space where we can share challenges and issues that are facing all of our communities. And at the end of the day, there tends to be a lot of overlap in the challenges that we're facing, whether that be access to health services, access to housing, access to linguistically accessible, culturally accessible resources. That's something that all of our communities are facing in their own rights. And so having a space where we're able to really collaborate and resolve some of those issues, and then also leverage resources to our communities, I think it's a really powerful model for what that collaboration can look like. And I think it really gets us towards a place where we're building actual power for our communities. And that looks like financial power, that looks like unity across communities. And again, I just think that's a really powerful space to be in. Also where we're able to really center the human component of our work and really center the work and center community in everything we do. And that's what's created such a strong culture of collaboration and not competition, as I mentioned earlier.
Thank you so much. And so just to kind of wrap things up and maybe transition, I want to thank our panelists. It's very clear that, that voice is not from academic, I'm from the academic side, that voice shouldn't be considered after the research questions and the interventions in the academic realm has been formed and then going out to reach the community, right? You need to have them there from the very beginning and start to create a shared understanding with community members. Like Jesse was saying about transparency, all of the barriers that folks will need to overcome, and so that both the intervention or whatever effort that you're trying to do is going to be the most effective and most important to the community that you want to affect. So I want to thank again our panelists and for this wonderful session.